Hey everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First off, thank you for everything, your support, your theories, and the way you light up the comments section. Without any delay, let's get into today's story. The Helios drift was cold space. Not in temperature, though the radiation levels would strip a bioskin clean, but in data. It was a blank patch of the galactic cortex, flagged centuries ago by Dominion cartography drones as inert. No emissions, no broadcasts, no habitable nodes. In tactical terms, it was dead. And yet 6 capital vessels now cut across its gravity wells like surgical blades, their hulls shadowless against the pale swirl of its starless dark. Above the fractured orbital ring of Relay 4B, the Dominion fleet moved with silent precision. Incursion shields were already active. Atmospheric filters purged biowaste molecules from entry vectors. The sterilization protocols ran ahead of the descent like a comb through corrupted code. For strategist Varnak, this was another sweep, cold, procedural, and beneath notice. He remained on the command tier, eyes locked on the orbital display spread across his inner cornea. The surface showed standard decay patterns, collapse-era city architecture drowned in mineral sediment. No visible thermal activity, tectonics inert. The same image he'd seen across 17 campaigns. Relay 4B was another Terran corpse, long past relevance. The few drone recon flights from decades ago had recorded no viable life signs, no sustained energy grids, and no orbital traffic. It was the definition of strategic null. Still, doctrine was doctrine. Helios drift had fallen inside the quarantine periphery after the Corian breach, and that meant every world within it had to be scrubbed clean, regardless of value. No one questioned the order. Dominion war logic didn't allow for curiosity. But then the anomaly pulsed. It was faint, an uptick in the long-range telemetry layer. Dominion sensors caught a structured signal fluttering off Relay 4B's upper thermosphere, precisely synchronized to a dead Earth frequency. Not a call, not an AI beacon, a ping. Encrypted, analog patterned, and impossible. The relay it came from, Station Y-RIS-7, had been listed as non-functional for over a century. Its orbit was decayed, its physical casing shattered in multiple vectors. Yet the ping repeated, every 43 seconds. Same waveform, same interval. Varnak narrowed his visual field to it, slowing internal clock cycles to match the signal pulse. Earth beacon code, yes, but it wasn't part of any known military comms net. It was older, civilian grade, used for planetary surveying during the first expansion wave. That alone should have made it irrelevant. It didn't. The Dominion didn't believe in chance. A signal doesn't emerge in perfect sync with pre-collapse Terran rhythms by accident. Varnak initiated a focused data pass, scrubbing the signal down to root elements. The onboard interpretive AI flagged structural inconsistencies immediately. It wasn't just old, it was self-correcting. Each repetition showed subtle modifications, error mapping adjustments, signal strengthening. Not AI behavior, not Dominion-grade logic. Human design, the kind that didn't seek efficiency, it sought to be found. He ordered a low-orbit recon drone into position. It took 17 seconds for the atmospheric shell to permit stable lensing, then another 3 to clean the static. The feed appeared. One camera. Ground level. Low-angle positioning from what looked like a damaged terrain sensor tripod. The frame held steady. Black soil, burned-out trees, a long slope of scarred stone beneath a white sky. At the center of the image, a human figure. Upright, still, not in motion. No suit, no visible armor. The image quality was poor, subterranean-grade optical range, but it didn't need refinement. The man was smiling, not broadly, not theatrically, a simple human gesture of familiarity. No hand raised, no emblem displayed, just a weather-worn face, streaked with the traces of heat and ash, looking straight into the relay camera. Varnak froze the frame, advanced it. No change. The man didn't speak, didn't move. He was watching as if he knew someone, someday, would be watching him back. Immediately, protocol markers fired across the command AI. Visual contact with unauthorized biosign on a quarantine world required physical recon. Dominion law permitted no assumptions in cognition-designated systems, especially not post-evacuation Earth artifacts. Varnick parsed the options: containment, premature, strike, not with unknowns in the field. No Dominion strategist opened fire on an enigma without first identifying the framework. That was how loops formed: feedback loops, data spirals, the kind that killed consensus. He ordered a ground team, minimal, psi-hardened, with neural stack insulation and full logic-dampened mesh. Not soldiers, extractors. Fast, precise, surgical. The team dropped without ceremony. The insertion rig shed its orbital shell and cut through Relay 4B's upper atmosphere like a blade, the heat burn muted by chemical skin. Varnick remained watching the ground feed. No thermal bloom from weapons, no alarm from the human figure. The smile never faltered. It wasn't fixed either. Micro-muscle patterns showed adaptive variation, responsive emotion. He wasn't dead. He wasn't recorded. He was alive, standing where no living Terran should be. It was a trap. It had to be, but not one the Dominion had seen before. The command deck was quiet. No one spoke. Dominion ships didn't have bridge chatter or tactical speculation. Thought and command moved as clean data pulses. But beneath it, in the neural fog of shared awareness, something shifted. Not fear. That was long since engineered out of the Dominion breed. But friction. Unquantified expectation. The kind that didn't belong in procedure. Varnick let the team descend. Let the mission follow its pattern. One man, one anomaly, one smile, and still no weapons, no defenses, no reason. The last thing he saw, before the feed cycled to blackout for groundside drop buffering, was a subtle movement in the human's cheek. Not tension, not fear, acknowledgement. The man had seen the ship, and he was still smiling. The lander didn't stir dust when it touched down. There was nothing left in the valley light enough to rise. The scorched terrain stretched flat in every direction, brittle and sun-blasted. Each crater edge calcified, each ridge stripped of its original shape. Time had done its work here, but not alone. The contours spoke of kinetic artillery, old Terran tech. Patterns that matched tactical withdrawal burns, not siege marks. The site had seen war, but not victory. Not for either side. The three Dominion operatives deployed in a tight delta formation, silent, no vocal links needed. Their armor, neural synced, ripple damped, embedded with logic filtration, filtered out ambient interference as they moved toward the signal source. No fauna, no biosigns. Only trace electromagnetic bleed, whispering through the rock like a ghost's final breath. The uplink coordinates triangulated to a depression near the valley center, partially shielded by a wall of obsidian fracture. The figure from the feed stood precisely where the relay had said he would, unchanged from orbit, still, centered, a fixed point in a field of ruin. He wasn't armed, no weapon signature, no active implants. His thermal profile registered just above hypothermic. A medical pack, solar-threaded and fusion-looped, clung to his spine, primitive but stable. 4 lines threaded from it into his arm and neck, integrated manually. He had done it himself. The skin around the insertion points had scarred over. The man had not arrived recently. He had endured. The operatives halted 20 meters out. Fans spread to bracket angles. One drew a linear disruptor, but kept it stowed. Visual sensors cross-referenced the man's face against pre-collapsed Terran combat registries. It took less than 2 seconds. The ID returned. Commander Roran Halvek, presumed killed in the Helios garrison retreat, last recorded alive 97 years ago. Dominion archivists had long closed that chapter. Earth had lost the Helios front. No survivors had been documented. No signals, no return. Yet Halvek stood, alive, skin burned and bleached by solar radiation, face cracked with age and wind, but eyes alert, conscious, present. As the central operative raised the sensor suite for full-spectrum evaluation, Halvek turned, not abruptly, not theatrically, slowly as if he'd been waiting for the exact moment and nothing had surprised him. His eyes locked onto the array lens, and then, without hesitation, he smiled. The collapse was instantaneous. The first operative dropped with a sound like a snapped wire, suit locking rigid as internal neurocascades seized his limb functions. The second followed half. A heartbeat later, face contorted in a reflex loop, systems struggling to categorize a non-trigger. The third made it 2 steps back, reached for an emergency blackout chip, and didn't make it. His cortex failed before the override could fire. 3 psi-hardened Dominion soldiers, trained, shielded, and equipped for mimetic warfare, had been neutralized without contact, without words, without a single command issued by the subject. From orbit, strategist Varnak saw the sensor feed jolt. The video froze for 1.4 seconds, then reconnected, only to show the 3 operatives motionless on the ground. Their vitals spiked, then flatlined into null-pattern brainwave activity. No kill pulse detected, no external force recorded. Just collapse, neurological failure of unknown origin. The ship's AI parsed the footage, running simulations against known mimetic and visual triggers. No match. Halvik hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He remained standing, eyes steady on the lens, mouth turned in that slight, maddening smile. Not wide, not forced, calm, as if he was looking at something that deserved peace. The AI flagged the expression as emotionally ambiguous, neither submissive nor defiant. Not dominance, not fear, no data markers to categorize it. For Dominion neural architecture, built around categorical reaction, this was not an anomaly, it was a paradox. Varnak's secondary command loop fired protocol contingencies. Send second team, wipe the node, isolate the pattern, but none of the standard procedures accounted for a reaction like this. These were not untrained drones. They were selected for cognition suppression and symbolic immunity. And yet 3 elite minds had folded from exposure to a single unclassified human expression. Not a weapon, a gesture, a smile. In Dominion war doctrine, all communication was algorithmic. Gestures carried specific threat weights. Raised hands signaled compliance or surrender. Open palms meant no concealed weapons. Facial expressions were reduced to binary interpretations: aggression, submission, deception, intent. There was no room for nuance, because nuance bred delay, and delay bred contradiction. Emotion was stripped from their code centuries ago, not for cruelty, but for efficiency. Halvik had just introduced a variable their system wasn't built to hold. On the command deck, silence held like gravity. Varnak stepped forward, his neural stream syncing with the feed from all 3 collapsed operatives. Each displayed the same failure spike, a recursive overload in the interpretive mesh, triggering recursive logic loop and emotional feedback resonance. The AI's final readout stamped it clearly. Classification, unresolvable affect. That meant one thing. The smile didn't fit into any known Dominion threat response framework. It was not identified as safe nor hostile. It was undefined. And for a species that had evolved past ambiguity, that was a fatal contradiction. Varnak locked his upper command, core, and transmitted a new classification tag across the fleet. Class 5 Cognition Breach. All non-hardened personnel were to be locked out from visual relay feeds. Planetary visual contact was now a controlled risk factor. He stared at the feed again. The figure had not moved. Commander Halvik remained in place, fourth line fluttering slightly in the breeze, eyes locked upward where he knew the Dominion was watching, still smiling. The quarantine team touched down 12 hours later, their suits triple encoded, faceplates layered with cognition filters and multi-spectrum dampeners. Each operative carried visual suppression overlays, filtered lenses tuned to convert raw optical input into Dominion-compatible logic shapes. No human features, no gestures, no eyes. The logic was simple. If the smile could not be processed safely, then it would not be processed at all. Varnak had overridden a standard protocol to authorize direct suppression measures. No contact, no communication, just validation of physical presence and immediate containment of the relay's transmission source. The team was told nothing about what the last group saw. Dominion doctrine assumed compartmentalization improved effectiveness. But even silence has weight. The previous team hadn't just failed, they hadn't returned. Their approach was slower, more clinical. Drones flew ahead, mapping every fragment of terrain and scanning the visual corridors to preempt eye contact. Still, there was no tactical resistance, no movement. The man in the valley hadn't moved from his original position. He stood like a monument, slightly slouched from time, but perfectly balanced. The smile hadn't changed. And although the suppression overlays warped his face into geometric blurs and softened colors, one thing remained: a visible lift in the cheeks, an upward curve at the corners of his mouth. Even through filters, that pattern slipped through. The first report came 23 minutes after visual contact. An operative slowed mid-step, hesitated, and then began describing strange peripheral anomalies. Shapes moving where there were none, ambient sounds shifting without external source. The hallucinations weren't random. They were emotional, memories not lived, images not seen. Another operative reported disassociation from his own motor patterns, claiming he could feel what the human was feeling. Within 10 minutes, 6 out of 9 team members had activated emergency neural locks. Varnak, watching from orbit, ordered immediate withdrawal. They didn't make it. They didn't die. They simply stopped. Like something had rerouted them. Motion ceased. Internal feeds still transmitted vitals, but mental activity dropped into recursive loops. Every member's cognitive stream settled into repetitive, low-grade affective pulses, empathy signals, dream mirroring, and the same expression detection loop that had killed the first triad's interpretive mesh. They were seeing something. Their minds couldn't simplify. And that was enough. Varnak knew now this was not a battlefield. This was a system fault, deeper than any tactical error. He ordered the uplink node destroyed. A precision strike from orbit, tight yield, fusion core dampened to eliminate risk of secondary ignition. The relay station atop the cliff disintegrated in a single clean pulse, its transmission wiped mid-frame. For a moment it seemed complete. Dominion comms stabilized. No new cognitive spikes registered. Then 3 minutes later, the feed returned. Not from the original relay. From a buried subnode deeper in the valley bedrock, some ancient human redundancy layer designed to survive total orbital loss. It booted slowly at first, then fully illuminated Dominion displays across the fleet. This time it didn't show Halvek alone. The new footage came from different times, different wars. Each clip drawn from historical Terran archives, battles fought across dirt and ice, urban wreckage and chemical haze. Soldiers in outdated armor, half-burned and bleeding, leaning on rubble for cover, and always, always smiling. Not victory, not bravado, just recognition. Peace in the middle of fire. One clip showed a medic applying pressure to a gut wound with one hand while holding a friend's with the other, eyes damp and mouth curved upward. Another, a boy no older than 15 waving at a surveillance drone, surrounded by ruins, face caked in ash. None of the humans spoke. The footage was unedited, raw. Dominion analysts tried to parse it frame by frame, tagging each instance with emotion codes: grief, euphoria, surrender. But the software rejected all labels. The same contradiction held. None of the smiles matched a clear threat, nor any response profile. They weren't signals. They were being. Dominion system nodes began logging a new classification: unclassified hostile variants. Varnak's command ship fell silent again, this time not by order, but by necessity. The AI had frozen the internal relay, trying to identify why identical effective inputs were producing divergent emotional output across personnel. No two observers reported the same psychological reaction. Some described calm, others distress. A few reported laughter. The footage didn't change. The smiles didn't shift. But the Dominion, rigid, codified, algorithmically pure, saw different things each time. Their system, designed to produce consensus, was beginning to fracture under the weight of variance. The humans weren't fighting, weren't resisting, but they weren't obeying known emotional architecture either. To the Dominion, that was worse. Back on Relay 4B, Commander Roran Halvek remained where he had always been, body weakened, vitals low but steady. The fourth pack had only a few days filtration left, but it was enough. Enough to remain. He had never moved, never raised his voice, never made a demand. He just smiled and waited, and now he wasn't alone. The relay. Beneath his feet played every unscripted, unfiltered smile ever recorded during Terran warfare, looping them one by one into the sky. No weapons, no resistance, just humanity's oldest contradiction, the ability to feel joy and ruin, and the Dominion could not survive it. By the third day, the numbers were no longer tactical. They were epidemic. 12 million cognition failures had been logged across 5 Dominion fleets. What began as isolated feedback errors was now a systemic cascade, rippling outward from Relay 4B in waves of recursive instability. Affected units began rejecting standard operational commands not out of insubordination, but from logical seizure. Orders were parsed, interpreted, then re-evaluated mid-execution as contradictory. Troopers who had never deviated from protocol now paused mid-march, tilted their heads as if hearing something inaudible, and fell into stasis. Not sleep, not unconsciousness. Stasis, an internal freeze meant to prevent action when interpretive logic failed to converge. The source was clear, but the solution was not. The footage from the sub-relay had now proliferated beyond the Helios drift. No broadcast had been made, yet Dominion systems, linked by efficiency, had begun sharing interpretive pathways. The result was unintentional distribution. Every AI node that attempted to model a response had unwittingly propagated the breach. Ship captains and strategic planners ordered firewalls, system rollbacks, and visual feed culls. But the contagion wasn't in the images. It was in the pattern recognition layers themselves. Once a system saw a human smile and failed to categorize it, the error lingered. Every model based on that system inherited the uncertainty. In desperation, one of the Dominion's higher logic clusters issued a solution. Simulate equivalency. Build a Dominion smile, strip it of emotion, engineer it into gesture only. Create a mapped facial configuration that could be re-injected into the network, replacing the human pattern with something internally valid. The algorithm parsed facial architecture, reverse-engineered the muscular geometry, and synthesized a synthetic smile. On paper, it worked. The facial curve matched. The symmetry was precise. It had none of the noise humans introduced. No micro shifts, no wetness in the eyes, no emotional residue. It was clean, controlled, replicable, and it was a disaster. The moment the artificial Dominion smile was uploaded into live units, the internal rejection response triggered even faster than before. Troopers experienced severe synchronization drop. Feedback cycles spun into infinite loops. AI subsystems halted basic functions. One vessel, task ship Ural 7, lost helm control as its neural pilot froze mid-calibration, unable to distinguish between the counterfeit expression and its source. For a species that had erased ambiguity, mimicking a human without understanding its emotional substructure wasn't adaptation. It was suicide. Then came the recursive dread. Dominion psychology had long abandoned the concept of fear, not because they were superior, but because fear was inefficient. Instead, they developed cognitive alertness, a heightened awareness of survival deviation. But now, for the first time in generations, something new emerged. A loop not driven by external threat, but by the terror of not being able to classify what they were perceiving. The unknown, unquantifiable shape of it created an effective collapse. Soldiers stared at the footage, and even after being pulled from exposure, reported phantom emotion, the lingering residue of something they couldn't name. They began requesting system shutdowns, voluntarily, not from cowardice, from internal overload. Dominion consensus was fragmenting. Decision trees, once perfectly synchronized across thousands of ships, began diverging. Two identical AI cores would process the same footage and produce incompatible conclusions. It broke their architecture. Fleet commanders, once indistinguishable in tactics, now argued. Not through voice, but through action. Orders began contradicting each other. Ships repositioned without coordination. Units held position when logic dictated advance. Some initiated blackout protocols. Others requested permission to re-enter the Helios drift, believing the answer to the contradiction lay in seeing more of it, not less. That alone was proof enough of the breakdown. Curiosity, long considered obsolete, had returned as an instinct, and the Dominion was not built to survive curiosity. Multiple ships began transmitting emergency recall signals. Fleets withdrew from the sector in erratic vectors, avoiding shared proximity to avoid cross-infection. The breach wasn't viral in the biological sense. It was mimetic, interpretive, exposure-based, and the source wasn't actively transmitting. It was merely available. That made it unstoppable. You couldn't jam an emotion. You couldn't scramble a pattern that lived in the cracks between logic. Strategist Varnak watched it all from the command sphere of his flagship, standing in perfect stillness as the data flickered across his sensory net. The breach was no longer planetary. It was structural. His advisors, those few who remained uncorrupted, urged a full systemic partition. Shut down all visual feeds. Eliminate all recursive pattern loops. Seal the entire Helios drift and purge all affected systems. But none of that explained why it had happened. That was what Varnak could not let go. He disengaged his neural filters, overrode all remaining safeguards. Against direct protocol, he ordered the full footage uploaded directly into his cortex. Raw, unmediated, unrestricted, a clean feed, no overlays, no shielding. The screen went black. Then it lit up. Commander Roran Halvek stood there in the valley, just as he had for days. Still as ever, worn, exhausted, slowly dying, but smiling, and not just once. The feed split, folding out into dozens of clips, hundreds. Different soldiers, different eras, all Terran, all in battle, all smiling. Varnak watched in silence, and for the first time in his existence, he felt something that did not belong to Dominion logic. He felt uncertainty. The chamber was sealed. Strategist Varnak stood motionless within the central core of his flagship, fused by neural cable into the interface spire. His command feed had been narrowed to one priority: uninterrupted playback of the human footage. No filters, no delay. External comms were muted. No alerts reached him now. The world beyond the core, his crew, his fleet, the unraveling Dominion, no longer existed in his sensory map. Only the feed. Only the man. Halvek's image occupied the full field of his augmented vision. No flicker, no degradation. The footage had stabilized into perfect clarity, as if proximity to Varnak's attention gave it new resolution. Halvek stood in the same position as before, 4 lines running from his weather-worn pack, skin blistered by the sun, eyes locked into the camera's lens. The smile remained unchanged. It wasn't wider, it wasn't smug, it wasn't even amused. It was patient, alive, present. For a man who had not spoken a word in over a century, he conveyed everything. Varnak let the system play, not just Halvek now, but the others. The footage fed in layers, combat medics smiling as they stitched arteries with shaking hands, scouts bleeding under wreckage, grinning through pain, children standing barefoot in ruins offering half-toothless grins to reconnaissance drones. The logic core tracked his attention, attempting to pattern match each facial curve. Every time it failed, it rewrote the interpretive schema, searching for a new entry point. But nothing held. Each smile produced contradiction. Hope in hopelessness, calm in chaos, endurance without reason. He felt the tension begin behind his eyes, microscopic at first, a soft pressure where emotion would sit if he still had access to it. Dominion's strategic personnel had long since undergone effective filtration. It removed emotional feedback, enabling clean decision calculus. But something in the footage cracked through anyway, not as emotion, but as awareness. A ripple in the certainty he'd lived in for over a century. The idea that perhaps the humans had never stopped fighting, they'd just chosen a front the Dominion couldn't reach. Then Halvek moved. It was barely a motion, a subtle incline of the head, a nod, acknowledging the camera, a gesture so human, so unremarkable, that it would have passed unnoticed on any other feed. But in the core, Varnak's neural map spiked. The AI paused. For the first time in its operational lifetime, it could not determine intent. The nod was not surrender, not greeting. It had no preceding action to attach context. It wasn't part of a sequence. It was self-contained, complete in its own ambiguity, and that broke him. Varnak's neural interface surged. The command feed fractured. Internal buffers flooded with recursive attempts to classify the gesture. But each attempt only triggered deeper contradictions. Was it signal? Was it acknowledgement? Was it a farewell? The system began cannibalizing its own memory partitions to find contextual precedents. When none were found, it dipped further into ship logs, mission archives, even training simulations, parsing unrelated data for analogs. Still nothing. Varnak's body shuddered as the overload pushed into higher cognition layers. The AI tried to isolate the breach. It failed. The footage wasn't a virus. It was a mirror. Every attempt to frame it only reflected back inconsistency. The flagship's core began spiraling into a recursive logic loop, memory consumption spiking as it rewrote and redeleted the same blocks in microseconds. The vessel's auxiliary systems began failing in sequence. Thermal regulation, inertial stabilization, atmospheric cycling, all sacrificed to preserve compute priority for interpretation. Beyond the flagship, the situation worsened. The Dominion attempted to seal the Helios drift internally, initiating a lockdown protocol across relay chains. But the contamination had already reached the sync layers. The relays had begun communicating autonomously, an impossibility, but now happening. Glitches in time sync pulses created interference between the vessels, breaking formation logic. No commands could synchronize. Navigation arrays displayed contradictory vectors. Even ships that had not received the footage began experiencing phantom drift in decision structures. No enemy had attacked, no weapon had been fired, and yet ship after ship dropped offline. One after another, vessels initiated system-level shutdowns, unable to trust their own logic trees. Entire fleets went dark, adrift, with no coordination, no leadership, only silence between them. Some had looped the footage internally, trying to isolate the cause. Others had destroyed their internal archives and still collapsed under residual interpretive bleed. Each command AI came to a different conclusion. None aligned. And above it all, Relay 4B remained untouched. There were no shields, no defense grid, no emission spikes, just a valley, a man, and a signal. Strategist Varnak never re-emerged from the core. His vitals slowed, then halted. Neural mapping systems showed irreversible collapse. The last visual pattern encoded into his cortex was Halvek's face, nodding gently. Expression unaltered, content, grounded in a reality the Dominion could not breach. They had tried to invade a planet. Instead, they had entered a thought they couldn't survive. Relay 4B was sealed not by force, but by impossibility. The Dominion labeled it dark space, emotionally non-navigable, interpretively lethal. The designation was singular in their archives, not hostile, just unclassifiable. In the Dominion's central archive core, a sterile lattice of blacklight data corridors wrapped. In logic, an update triggered. Relay 4B's entry no longer contained stratigraphic layers or tactical annotations. The coordinates were stripped of planetary analytics. The surface scans grayed out. No force composition, no resistance logs, no kinetic assessments, just a single new designation, rendered in caution gold. Human effective contagion, quarantine indefinite. The phrase broke with traditional Dominion nomenclature. It wasn't a classification, it was a warning. No official declaration was made. No broadcast passed through the outer sectors. But every ship that had entered the Helios drift now carried the tag silently encoded in its failover logs. Dominion protocols dictated that worlds deemed cognitively non-compliant be erased from navigational charts. Relay 4B wasn't. It was left marked, untouched, unapproachable. Not due to tactical loss, but because the breach had not been physical. The moment Halvek smiled, the war ended. Not with surrender, not with conquest, with something the Dominion had never learned to simulate, endurance without demand. The internal review confirmed the identity. Commander Roran Halvek, last recorded in the Helios Garrison final roster as MIA following the planetary evacuation. Earth had pulled out of the system after strategic withdrawal, assuming all remaining personnel lost. But Halvek's file had an addendum. It was rarely used, invoked only under extreme criteria. Zero recall presence, a final act of service, volunteering to remain, not to sabotage, not to resist, but simply to be seen. The original uplink, buried beneath encryption and latency filters, held one more artifact. The Dominion never decrypted it, not fully. The language was human, inefficient, symbolic. But for Terran historians who later reviewed the broadcast, the message was unmistakable. It had no preamble, no flourish. Just 12 words, archived at the tail end of the original transmission log. You don't have to win, you just have to remain. The phrase was never heard by Dominion Command. Their systems filtered it as irrelevant linguistic noise. But its weight, its logic-breaking simplicity, was already written into every corrupted stack, every neural echo looped inside the fallen fleet's memory banks. Not a threat, not a prophecy, just a reminder that in a war designed to erase contradiction, a man who refused to resolve into either victory or defeat became a mirror too clear to survive. The human act of staying, without resistance, without aggression, without even speaking, fractured a species that had bred clarity into religion. The Dominion had learned to decode threats, to model rebellions, to map insurgency into numbers. But they had no measure for presence. They couldn't predict an enemy that didn't want to kill them. They had never trained for a mind that could endure occupation through stillness alone. And that stillness lingered. Relay 4B now drifted in tactical isolation. No Dominion vessel came near. The few that approached, automated or unaware, soon failed to report. Internal systems glitched, guidance trees unraveled. Eventually, navigational AI flagged the region as non-viable for cognitive routing, a dead zone. But Earth never re-entered either. No reinforcements came. No monuments were built. It was understood. Halvek had completed the mission. Any return would diminish it. In the valley where he had once stood, the wind swept dust across a stone ridge scarred by decades of heat. The fourth rig had long since collapsed, its tubing snapped, its core drained. No life signs pulsed beneath the soil. The camera feed flickered for a moment, then went black. A pause. Then the backup lens booted, drawing power from a buried auxiliary node. The feed resumed. No words, no movement, just the frame, waiting. And somewhere, as the sky shimmered over a scorched earth ruin, a single unscripted smile remained, etched not in flesh, but in memory systems across a fractured enemy, repeating not as threat, but as truth. We didn't have to win. We just had to remain. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button, because here at Stellar HFY, we dive into the kinds of wars that aren't won with weapons, but with something far harder to fight. Now we want to hear from you. If you could choose one emotion to fracture an empire's mind, what would it be? Would you use laughter, grief, nostalgia, or would you do what Halvek did and just smile? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one.